Hello, hello! Pizza Packs here, and we're back with the second set of decks from the 1996 Pro Tour Inauguration, Collector's Edition. So this is decks 3 and 4, played by Bertrand Lestree and Shawn Hammer Regnier. I think that's right. Now, this one is still sealed. Also, something I didn't notice earlier, it was in between two of the boxes, but this actually still has the certificate of authenticity. There were only 20,000 of these made. So this is certificate 18080, so 18,080. Nice repeating numbers there. Very nice. But this is sealed, so we're going to go ahead and get into it. To try not to ding it up too much while removing the plastic. Keep in mind, like, I'm never planning on getting rid of this set. I've wanted this since I was a kid. And to be able to have it to actually play the decks together. Let's see. So I'm sure someone's going to get bent out of shape that I'm opening this up, but it's magic. They're meant to be played with. Ooh. Sure if I just did that or if that was already like that. Right, let's start with the first deck, which would be Lestree. Now, because these are tuck boxes, they did shift over time and get stuck. That does happen with tuck boxes. I've run into this with poker decks that come in slip packs like this before. On the bright side, these have sides that can be slid out. Yeah. It's just issue with the packaging design. Try not to bust them, but as you can see, the weight, eventually the weight of the deck just pushes it out of the tuck box, and then the tuck box gets jammed. But there's a way around that. And that's also another reason why, leaving these sealed doesn't really do much, because eventually they're going to damage themselves anyway. As you can see, even though the bigger box was sealed, the inner packs were not sealed in this inaugural edition. So, and without modifying these would eventually basically tear through the tuck box because of gravity. Let's see, deck number 3. This was played by Bertrand Lestree. I think he was one of the quarterfinalists, but I'm not 100% sure. Proxy cards. Skip through those. Got our deck list. Try and focus that a little better. Yeah, have a cast off from the tuck box. We have our deck list. It's our sideboard. Cover the sideboard first, and then there should be, here's a little blurb about them. Bertrand Lestree, finalist. Okay. So finals defeated by Lecanto 2-1. Semifinals defeated Lindbach 3-0. Quarterfinals defended Regnier 2-1. I guess it was 3-0 because the third one was scooped, or I'm not sure why they would mark it 3-0. Normally, now you either do best of 5, in which case the other ones wouldn't make any sense, or you do best of 3, in which case the middle one doesn't make sense. But Lestree, a 25-year-old business development strategist from Pantin, France, played the most popular deck type at the tournament, a green-white Armageddon Urnum so Armageddon was what that was commonly called. Deck with strong mass destruction capabilities. Lestree's most interesting playing quirk was his constant use of extra life, mostly from Ivory Tower and Zurin Orb, to draw extra cards from his Sylvan library. Nice. So there's going to be some real classics in this deck. Right, on the sideboard we have 2 Heavy Gargoyles. Playing per red, that was, of course, against the red decks. Whirling Dervish, which was sure instrumental for taking down the many Necropotence decks that were at this event. Protection. It has protection from black, which basically shuts down those Necropotence decks. Karma, again for the mono black decks, which black also at this point had no way of dealing with enchantments other than Nevinral's Disc, which also set back their strategy because it would destroy their own Necropotence. We have 2 Karma. Order of Lietber. Was this the... Yeah, this was the counter to... Or not counter, but the other side of Order of the Ebon Hand. Order of the Ebon Hand was the black version of this, which was very similar to White Knight and Black Knight from Alpha Beta Unlimited. But 1 copy of Order of Letber, or Lietber. Circle of Protection green, 2 copies with 2 different arts in this. Got the 4th edition art and the Ice Age art. We have Circle of Protection red in 2 different versions, the 4th edition art and the Circle of Protect, or the Ice Age art. Good old Black Vice, which I believe was restricted during this event. We have another Wrath of God, which they ran 2 in the main deck, 1 in the board, and then 2 Divine Offering. Very nice. Fairly well-rounded sideboard. Okay. Now for the main deck. So we've got 2, let's see, 4, 5, 6 forests. That beautiful beta art. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 planes. 2 land tax. Land tax, of course, being just one of the best card advantage engines ever printed, especially for white. It just lets you keep pulling basics out of your deck. It's pretty great. Felwar Stone, mana rock that gets around Armageddon. It's one of the big things here. Also, it accelerates you. We have 2 Felwar Stones. We have 2 Order of Lietber with the other 2 arts from Fallen Empires. This had 3 arts, I believe. It's either 3 or 4 arts, but there's 3 arts represented here. Zurin Orb, which again I believe is restricted at the time. 2 Wrath of God. 2 Icy Manipulator. Good way of controlling opponent's creatures, lands, and artifacts. 1 Autumn Willow. It's just a big threat that was hard to deal with. Sarah Angel, evasive attacker, a 4/4 flyer for 5 with Vigilance before it was called Vigilance. It's just very good rate at the time. Spectral Bears, 2 copies. Let's see. Yeah, this was, I'm sure, a metagame decision to go after the Necropotence decks, but it's still effective otherwise. So it's a good idea. Sorry about that. Friend was calling. Then we have 2 Sylvan Library. Very nice, great card advantage engine, especially if you're gaining a ton of life off of Ivory Tower, which was one of the big strategies here, or off Zurin Orb before you Armageddon. We have Havenwood Battleground, 1 copy. 4 Brushland, Roll Painland, actually currently legal and standard. That helps you hit your colors. We have Ruins of Trocaire, good way to effectively ramp for 1 turn. Often used alongside balance and other things that cared about how many lands you had, so that you could get a little more advantage out of it. In fact, Ruins of Trocaire and balance together just combo well, in that it gives your opponent 1 less land. We have balance, the great equalizer. If you watch Vintage Cube at all, you should know the power of this. But one of just the most broken cards ever printed. Seems a little less impressive these days, but it's not uncommon when you have things like Zurin Orb and Zurin Orb's one of the big things. Zurin Orb and not playing creatures and like emptying out your hand. It's not uncommon to completely destroy all your opponent's lands, empty their hand, and kill all their creatures at the same time with a balance. So, and the idea is that you either break parity with artifacts or have some other way of gaining an advantage from it, or you expect that you can recover faster than your opponent can through things like land tax. So you have Swords to Plowshares, 4 copies, easily the best instant speed removal ever printed. We have 4 Disenchants, probably to deal with opposing Ivory Towers, Icy Manipulators, Necropotence, Land Tax, all the Sylvan Libraries, all the good stuff that was being thrown around. We have 3 Armageddons, destroy the lands. Generally, the idea behind this deck was to ramp into Urnum Gen, and then immediately Armageddon afterwards, so that you can just attack in and hopefully beat your opponent before they can recover. Speaking of which, Urnum Gen, 4/5 for 4, with minimal drawback if your opponent, like effectively no drawback if your opponent doesn't have creatures really contend with things, or if you don't, or if you don't have to worry about forests. Also thing. We have Fenhorn Elves and Llanowar Elves, effectively same kind of thing. Fenhorn Elves being from Ice Age, Llanowar Elves being from Alpha Beta Unlimited 4th, giving you a nice way of ramping early so that you can get to that Armageddon with fewer land drops being disrupted. We have Strip Mine, which I believe was also restricted at the time. One of the only ways to just unconditionally destroy a land that's ever been printed. Wizards really doesn't like doing that anymore. The ones I can think of are Strip Mine, Ghost Quarter, and there might be 1 or 2 others that are actually lands that destroy other lands. Most of the time it's restricted to non-basics or has some other restriction on it, like Tectonic Edge, where they have to have at least 4 other lands. But great way of taking your... Oh, I guess this wasn't restricted at the time because there's a full set of 4 in here. So this would have been before the Strip Mine restriction. But yeah, it's just a great way of taking your opponents off of colors. disrupting their plays, making it harder for them to effectively play their deck. We have 4 copies of Strip Mine and Ivory Tower, which I'm fairly certain was restricted at the time. Great way of just sitting back with full grip and gaining a bunch of life, and then using things like Rain, not working. Land tax to keep your hand full, and Sylvan Library to give you better card selection and just draw more cards, utilizing that life. So now that we've gone over Bertrand Lestree's deck, let's take a look at the Hammers deck, which is Shawn, Hammer, Regnier. Regnier? I think it's Regnier. But I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to flatten that tuck box back out, so hopefully it won't get quite as badly stuck. Okay. And again, as you can see, these boxes just kind of self-destruct over time because of gravity. Let's take a look at Shawn, Hammer, Regnier's deck. Regnier. Flatten that back out. Yep. At some point I might modify these, but I would like to keep it as original as possible. All right, we have our proxy cards. Beginning, we have Shawn Regnier's deck list. This looks like it is a blue-white millstone deck. So blue-white control that look to win through milling your opponent. Got our sideboard. Main deck, and there's your little bio. So Shawn Regnier, aka Hammer, quarterfinalist, defeated by Lestree 2-1. Regnier, a 27-year-old comic book store owner from Manchester, New Hampshire, played a blue-white millstone deck with very heavy permission, including 12 counterspells. A former professional arm wrestler, Hammer had a very relaxed conversational style which he used to unnerve his opponents. So he was very chatty. Let's take a look at sideboard. They have, let's see, 1 Divine Offering, 1 Felden's Cane, which I believe was restricted at the time, 1 Truce, let's see, 1 Fountain of Youth, 1 Aronson's Aura, so another way of destroying extra enchantments, and you could also use this to counter enchantment spells. Wow, forgot how good this was. So you bring this in against the, well, I mean, both against the Necropotence decks and against other decks looking to utilize things like Sylvan Library or land tax to counteract that before they can get too much value. Heavy Gargoyles, of course, for the protection from red, and it's just a fairly decent threat. 2 Memory Lapse. 1 Sea Sprite, again for the protection from red, and it's a flying threat. 2 Steel Artifact, good way of grabbing your opponent's Icy Manipulators and Ivory Towers. Like, having 2 Ivory Towers is just great, especially when you're restricted to just 1. We have Circle of Protection Black with the Alpha Beta Unlimited art. Then 2 Circle of Protection red, both with the Ice Age art. Okay. So in some of the other decks, they had alternating arts. I'm not sure if they actually had those in the if the actual players had them split like that, or if that was just a design decision for these decks. I personally like to have mine matching. I do know a lot of players back in like with Fallen Empires and Homelands when you had multiple and alliances where you had multiple arts of the same card in the set, um, which we're running into that again now. Some players would want to have one of each version in their deck, but I like to have mine match because there is a competitive disadvantage to having different arts on them. Let's look at the main deck. So we've got 3 Millstone, which is the primary win condition for the deck. So milling your opponent, very good. Well, in a control strategy, especially when there's a lot of other control decks, it's a good strategy. Icy Manipulator to shut off artifacts, creatures, and lands. Land tax, 3 copies of land tax for just consistent land drops and to outvalue your opponent. Zurin Orb, it's a lot harder to be attacked down when you can sacrifice lands for life. So effectively, like if you're drawing extra cards, or if you have land tax, you can just effectively keep gaining extra life off of that. It's very hard for your opponent to kill you in that instance. You have Ivory Tower, again getting powered up by the land tax and also restricted during this time. Just holding extra cards to keep gaining life, because again, creatures weren't super powerful at this point. You know, Aramgen was a 4/5 for 4, but if you have a full grip of 7 cards, it's effectively just doing 1 damage a turn if you have an Ivory Tower out. In balance, the Great Equalizer, already discussed that, but acts as an extra board wipe, can be used to control the number of cards in an opponent's hand. Granted, you have to manipulate the number of cards you have in your hand through either playing things or like discard effects or any number of other things. To get lower hand count, you can use Zurin Orb to sacrifice lands down to have your opponent sacrifice more lands. So a lot of tricks that you can do with balance. It is a restricted card in Vintage for a reason. It's one of the most powerful cards ever printed. We have 4 disenchants, of course, to handle artifacts and enchantments from the opponents. Good against Necropotents and opposing Ivory Towers, land tax, Sylvan Library, so on and so on. Swords to Plowshares, best instant speed creature removal ever printed. Released in white. Wrath of God, a full 4. Got to keep the board clear. Recall, which I believe was also restricted at this time. Just a good way to get stuff back from your graveyard. So, especially useful. I believe this interacts with Felden's Cane. It's been long enough since I've played Felden's Cane that I don't remember. It does not. So Felden's Cane just lets you reshuffle once. This would be a way to get back extra counter spells and disenchants, all kinds of stuff that you're looking to get back. Power Sink, strong counter spell. Also pretty great for emptying out your opponent's mana pool. Keep in mind this was also when mana burn was a thing, so floating mana wasn't a great idea most of the time. We have a full 4 Power Sink. And we have Spell Blast, another very strong counter spell. And one of the strongest counter spells ever printed, Counterspell. It's kind of hard to beat counter target spell for 2 mana. So 12 main deck pieces of permission, then an extra 2, I believe, in the board. 2 extra 2 more memory laps on the board. We have our backup strategy if we have to go on the beatdown with Mishra's Factory. 3 copies. 1 City of Brass. Okay. We have 4 Adhikar Wastes. Oh, another trick with Icy Manipulator is City of Brass deals damage whenever it's tapped. So you can use Icy Manipulator to tap your opponent's City of Brass to deal damage to them. And if they try to float mana in response, again, we have mana burn at this time. So if they don't use that mana, there wasn't a whole lot of ways to do that. There weren't very many good mana sinks at the time. You could get 2 damage off of it, potentially. So, 4 Adhikar Wastes. Good way to consistently hit colors. And, yeah. Comes in untapped, all that good stuff. Ruins of Trocaire has a nice little combo with balance. So can also have some gotchas, which is pretty nice. For Sylvanite or Civilianite Temple or Civilianite Temple. That is a hard word for me to remember. What was I going to say? Oh, so this is a good way of holding up a counter spell, even if you just have 1 land up. Yes, you get a tempo disadvantage by sacrificing a land, but you're also countering a spell, which at this time, tempo was a lot less of a concept that was being used, design-wise at least. So we have 4 islands with the good art, and then 6 planes, and that's the whole deck. All right. Well, thank you for joining me on this adventure with decks 3 and 4 of the inaugural Pro Tour from New York in February 1996. It's astounding that was, 27 years ago now. But absolute wonderful part of Magic history. I wish there was more video coverage of this event available. But there's not a whole lot. They did have a videotape, oddly enough, that you could buy, and it was listed on the back of the little booklet that came with these decks. It was $14.95 plus $3 postage and handling for a VHS, and you could order by phone, fax, or by mail, which is just astounding. But that is how it worked back then. Yeah, how things have changed. I don't think Wizards of the Coast even had a website yet at this point. Could be wrong. Yeah. All right. Well, until next time, stay awesome. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.